My father smiled as he raised his glass, the room already leaning toward him, already ready to laugh. "Now this," he said, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder, "is my younger daughter. Not exactly the one we brag about, but she insisted on coming anyway." The laughter came fast, polite, controlled, cruel in the way only polite laughter can be. Then the Navy SEAL my sister was about to marry stepped forward, reached out to shake my hand, and froze. His eyes dropped to my posture, my insignia. He stepped back, and then in front of everyone he saluted. "Ma'am, Admiral." And just like that, my father's world cracked. The chandelier light above us felt too bright. That's what I remember first. Not the laughter, not the silence that followed, not even my father's hand still resting on my shoulder like he owned the moment. It was the light, golden and expensive and deliberate, pouring down over polished marble floors and carefully arranged flowers, illuminating every face in that room with the kind of clarity that left nowhere to hide. I didn't move. I didn't react. I simply stood there exactly where my father had positioned me, slightly behind him, slightly to the side. Not part of the center, never part of the center. His fingers pressed lightly against my shoulder as if reminding me where I belonged. "Relax," he added, just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "She takes things too seriously. Always has." More laughter. A woman in pearls covered her mouth, smiling into her wineglass. A man in a tailored suit nodded as if my father had said something universally understood. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, not sharp, not overwhelming, just familiar. Recognition. Nothing had changed. Not really. I had spent years telling myself that distance would shift something between us. That time would soften him. That achievement, real, measurable, undeniable achievement, might one day force him to see me differently. But standing there under that chandelier surrounded by people who mattered to him, I realized something simple. To my father, I wasn't invisible. I was inconvenient. The Navy SEAL, Daniel Carter, my sister's fiancé, stepped forward, then his hand extended with easy confidence. He wore his dress uniform like it belonged to him, posture straight, gaze steady. There was nothing performative about him. No need to impress. "Daniel," he said, "I've heard a lot about you." I almost smiled at that. I reached out to take his hand. His grip was firm, professional, familiar. And then, something shifted. It was subtle at first. His eyes didn't leave mine, not in a social way, not in the casual scanning that happens during introductions. He was assessing. The way we're trained to assess. Posture, bearing, stillness under pressure. His grip loosened slightly. His gaze dropped briefly to the clean lines of my uniform, not the obvious details, not what civilians noticed. Something else. Something quieter. Then he stepped back. Just a fraction. But enough. Enough that the conversation around us faltered, enough that the air changed. And then, he saluted. Clean, precise, unmistakable. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "Admiral." The room stopped. Not gradually, not in a ripple. Completely. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ask permission, the kind that takes over a space and holds it still. I heard a glass clink somewhere in the distance, a chair shift, a breath caught too sharply. My father's hand fell from my shoulder. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Daniel. Because I recognized that moment. I had lived inside that moment before, the instant when truth surfaces without warning, when a situation reveals itself not as it was presented, but as it actually is. His salute held for exactly the right length of time. Then he lowered his hand. "Apologies," he added, his tone unchanged. "Didn't expect to meet you here." I nodded once. "No need to apologize," I said quietly. My voice sounded exactly the way I needed it to. Even controlled. Untouched. Behind us, the room began to breathe again. Whispers low and uncertain threaded through the silence. "Admiral? Did he just say?" That can't be right. I turned then. Not toward the crowd. Toward my father. Frank Whitman stood exactly where he had been, glass still in hand posture, still upright. But something in his expression had fractured. Not fully, not visibly, not yet. But enough. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Daniel," he said. forcing a lightness into his voice that didn't quite land. "You must be mistaken." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't rush to correct himself. He didn't backtrack. Instead, he glanced at me. A question. "Permission?" I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not now. Not like this." He understood. Of course he did. Perhaps he said evenly. Wouldn't be the first time I've misread a situation. It was a perfect answer. Neutral, respectful, non-committal. But the damage had already been done. Because the word had been spoken. Admiral? And words like that don't disappear. They linger. They settle. They reshape perception in ways that can't be undone. My father let out a short laugh, too quick, too sharp. "Well," he said, lifting his glass again, "let's not get carried away. My daughter has always had a flair for dramatics." A few people chuckled. Not all of them. Not this time. I could feel it, the shift. Subtle but real. The room was no longer leaning entirely toward him. And he knew it. I stepped back slightly, easing out from beside him. Not abruptly. Not defiantly. Just enough to reclaim my own space. "I think I'll get some air," I said. No one stopped me. No one argued. Because for the first time since I had walked into that house, I wasn't the least important person in the room anymore. I moved through the hallway quietly past framed photographs of a life I had never quite belonged to. My sister's graduation, my father's business awards, charity galas, smiling faces arranged in perfect alignment. There were no photos of me. Not recent ones anyway. The front door opened with a soft click. Cool evening air met me immediately, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant traffic, the kind of ordinary smell that felt grounding after a room built entirely on appearances. I stepped outside and let the door close behind me. Silence. Real silence. I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. But beneath that, something had shifted. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Clarity. Because for years I had believed the conflict between my father and me was personal, emotional, something rooted in misunderstanding or disappointment or difference. Standing in that room, hearing him reduce me to something small, something insignificant, and then watching that narrative crack in a single unplanned moment, I understood something else. This wasn't about who I was. It was about what he needed me to be. Manageable. Explainable. Contained. And for the first time, that version of me no longer existed. Behind me, the door opened again. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. "You should have said something." My father's voice came tight with controlled frustration. I faced forward, looking out over the darkened street. "There wasn't anything to say," I replied. A pause. "You embarrassed me," he said. I let that sit between us. Then quietly. I didn't say a word. Silence stretched. Thicker this time. He stepped closer. "You're going to explain this," he added. Not a question, a statement. I finally turned. Met his eyes. "No," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The night air lingered on my skin long after I stepped back inside. The house sounded different now. Not louder, if anything quieter, but the quality of the noise had changed. Conversations were tighter, more careful. Laughter came in short bursts, followed by glances. People were no longer just enjoying the evening. They were recalibrating. I walked past the living room where the earlier introduction had taken place. The same chandelier still glowed overhead, but the room felt smaller somehow. Or maybe it was just that the illusion had shifted. A few guests looked up as I passed. This time they didn't look through me. They looked at me. Curiosity had replaced dismissal, and curiosity, I'd learned over the years, was far more dangerous. I didn't stop. I moved toward the back hallway instead, where the noise faded into something manageable. The walls were lined with photographs frames arranged in perfect symmetry, every image curated. My father believed in presentation. He always had. I slowed in front of one frame. My sister Emily stood in a white dress, smiling at something just outside the camera's view. My father stood beside her, hand resting proudly at her back. They looked like a magazine cover, effortless, polished, complete. I wasn't in that photo. I wasn't in most of them. There had been a time when that absence hurt. When I was younger, I used to notice it immediately, Every wall, every album. I'd search for myself the way a child looks for proof they belong. Sometimes I'd find one tucked into a corner or taken before I'd grown into the version of myself my father no longer recognized. Other times there was nothing. And over time I stopped looking. Funny, isn't it? Emily's voice came from behind me. I turned. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely, her expression unreadable. Up close, she looked exactly the way people expected her to, graceful, composed, the kind of beauty that didn't need explanation. "You always stop at that one," she said, nodding toward the photo. I didn't realize I did. She smiled faintly. "You do." Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just familiar. We had never fought the way other siblings did. No dramatic arguments, no shouting matches. Our distance had always been quieter than that. More permanent. "Daniel seems impressed," she said after a moment. I met her gaze. "He's observant." "That's one way to put it." She stepped further into the hallway, her heels soft against the wood floor. "Is it true?" she asked. The question hung in the air, carefully neutral. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I studied her. Emily had always been good at this, asking without asking, positioning herself so that she never had to commit first. It wasn't manipulation exactly. It was preservation. "Does it matter?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "It might." "To you," I pressed. A pause. Then quietly to Dad. "Of course." I nodded once. "That sounds right." She exhaled just barely. "You know how he is," she said. "He doesn't like being surprised." No, I agreed, he doesn't. We stood there for another moment, the weight of unsaid things pressing in around us. "You could have told us," she added. I considered that. When I asked. At Thanksgiving, between the polite questions and the polite silence. Or maybe at Christmas, right after Dad introduced you as the one he was proud of. Her jaw tightened slightly. "That's not fair." "No," I said evenly, "it's accurate." She looked away first. "That wasn't new." "Daniel's going to ask more questions," she said, shifting the subject just enough to regain footing. "He won't let this go." I wouldn't expect him to. "And Dad?" She hesitated. "He's already upset." I almost smiled. "Already?" Her eyes flicked back to mine. "You know what I mean." I did. My father didn't lose control in public. Not fully. Not in ways that couldn't be recovered with the right words, the right gestures, the right narrative. But I had seen the crack. And so had she. "I'm not here to cause problems," I said. Emily let out a soft, humorless breath. "You don't have to try." That landed. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. For my father, my existence had always been disruptive. Even when I wasn't in the room. "I should get back," she said after a moment. "People are asking questions." "Of course they are." She paused at the doorway, then glanced back. "Just be careful," she added. It wasn't concern. Not exactly. It was something closer to warning. Then she was gone. I remained in the hallway for a few seconds longer, letting the quiet settle again. Then I moved. Upstairs. My old room was at the end of the corridor, exactly where it had always been. The door opened without resistance, revealing a space that felt frozen in time. The furniture hadn't changed. The layout hadn't changed. Even the faint scent clean linen and something floral was the same. But the details told a different story. The shelves were empty. The desk cleared. The walls bare. Anything that had once belonged to me had been removed. Not recently. Carefully. Deliberately. As if erasing me had been part of maintaining order. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. For a moment I just stood there. Breathing. Remembering. 17. That was the last time I had stood in this room and felt like it might still be mine. The acceptance letter had arrived on a Tuesday. West Point. I hadn't expected to get in. Not really. But when I held the envelope in my hands, thick, official, undeniable, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. I brought it downstairs. My father was in the study reviewing something on his laptop. He didn't look up immediately when I entered. "Dad," I said. He glanced up then, just briefly. "Make it quick." I handed him the letter. He took it, scanned the first line, then the second. His expression didn't change. Not surprise. Not pride. Not even disappointment. Just calculation. He set it down on the desk. You're not going, he said. I blinked. I what? It's not a good fit, he continued, already turning back to his laptop. You'll find something more appropriate. Dad, I got in. And you'll decline. The conversation had ended for him. But not for me. I'm not declining, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That got his attention. He leaned back, slowly studying me in a way that made my chest tighten. Do you have any idea what that environment is like, he asked? The kind of people you'll be surrounded by? Yes. Then you should know better, he said. That's not where you belong. Where do I belong, I asked. He didn't hesitate. Here, he said, with your family, in a life that makes sense. I remember the silence that followed. Heavy. Defining. I'm going, I said. Something shifted in his expression then. Not anger. Something colder. If you walk out that door for this, he said quietly, don't expect us to pretend it's something to celebrate. I swallowed. I'm not asking you to celebrate, I replied. I'm asking you to understand. I understand perfectly, he said. You're making a mistake. Maybe I was. At 17, it's hard to tell the difference between conviction and defiance. But I knew one thing. If I stayed, I would disappear. So I left. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me standing in the empty room once more. Years had passed since that moment. Deployments. Commands. Decisions that carried weight far beyond anything my father had ever imagined for me. And yet, standing there, I realized something that surprised me. Part of me had always hoped that one day he would see it. Not the rank. Not the title. Me. A knock at the door pulled me back to the present. Sharp. Controlled. I didn't need to ask who it was. Come in, I said. The door opened. My father stood there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. We need to talk, he said. I nodded once. Yes, I replied, we do. And this time, neither of us pretended it would be easy. My father didn't speak right away. He stood just inside the room, one hand still resting on the doorknob, as if he hadn't fully decided whether he intended to stay or simply to mark the moment and leave. That was his way. Control didn't always come through action. Sometimes it came through hesitation, through making the other person wait. I didn't fill the silence. I had learned a long time ago that silence unsettled him more than confrontation ever could. Finally, he stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. His gaze moved across the room, taking in the stripped shelves, the empty walls, the absence of anything that once belonged to me. You've kept it minimal, he said. It was almost a compliment. Almost. I don't live here, I replied. No, he agreed, you don't. Another pause. Then he turned to face me fully. Explain what happened downstairs. Not a question. Never a question. I leaned lightly against the edge of the desk, folding my arms, not defensively, just comfortably, grounded. There's nothing to explain, I said. He recognized something. He reacted. That's not how this works, my father snapped, the first crack in his composure surfacing. People don't just salute strangers. I'm not a stranger. His jaw tightened. To him he pressed. I held his gaze. Number. The word settled between us like something solid. Unmovable. He exhaled sharply through his nose, pacing once across the room before stopping again. You're going to tell me exactly what you've been doing, he said. And I want the truth this time. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how familiar it felt. The assumption. The idea that the truth had always been available to him if only I had chosen to share it properly. I've always told you the truth, I said quietly. No, he countered immediately. You've told me pieces, you've withheld context, I've told you what you were willing to hear, I interrupted. That stopped him. For a moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. Then it was gone. You think this is a game, he asked. I think you're uncomfortable, I replied. Silence. Heavy, pressing. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. You embarrassed me in front of people who matter, he said. Do you understand that? I met his eyes without flinching. I didn't say anything, I repeated. That's not the point. No, I agreed, it is. His expression hardened. You've always been difficult, he said. Always pushing, always resisting. It's exhausting. I considered that. then nodded once. Then stop trying to control me. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, but because they were simple. Direct. For a moment he didn't respond. Then he let out a short, humorless laugh. You think that's what this is, he said. Control. I think that's what it's always been. His eyes narrowed slightly. Everything I've done has been for this family, he said. For stability, for reputation, for you, I finished. That was the second crack. Smaller than the first, but deeper. You have no idea what it takes to maintain what I've built, he said, his voice tightening. No, I agreed, but I know what it costs. We stood there facing each other across a distance that had never really been about space. Finally, he shook his head. This isn't over, he said. I know. He turned toward the door. Paused. Then, without looking back. Be ready to explain yourself tomorrow. The door closed behind him with a quiet final click. I exhaled slowly. My pulse was steady. My breathing controlled. But beneath that, something had shifted again. Not in him. In me. Because for the first time I wasn't waiting for him to understand. I wasn't hoping for it. The knock came again less than a minute later. Different rhythm. Lighter. I crossed the room and opened the door. Daniel Carter stood in the hallway, his posture relaxed, but his expression focused. Do you have a minute? He asked. I stepped aside. Of course. He entered, closing the door behind him with a quiet precision that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a casual conversation. He took a quick look around the room, taking in the emptiness, the absence, the deliberate removal of anything personal. Then his eyes returned to me. That's not how someone gets treated who's done what you've done, he said. Straight to the point. I appreciated that. People see what they expect to see, I replied. And your father expects to see less, he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly. I nodded once. Go ahead. His gaze held mine. Why haven't you corrected him? The question hung there. Simple. Direct. I considered it carefully before responding. Because it wouldn't matter, I said. His brow furrowed slightly. It would matter to me. That's different. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, it is. Silence settled between us, but not uncomfortable. Measured. Intentional. I recognized you, he said after a moment. Not at first, not when I walked in, but when you stood still like that, when everyone else was reacting and you weren't. He shook his head slightly. I've seen that before. Where I asked. Kandahar, he said. 2018, joint operation, extraction went sideways. The memory surfaced instantly. Dust, heat, radio static cutting in and out. A situation collapsing faster than it should have. I wasn't on the ground, I said. No, he agreed. You were in command. A pause. You gave the order to pull us out. I remembered that. Not the details. The decision. The weight of it. I did my job, I said. He let out a quiet breath. You saved a lot of lives. I didn't respond. Not because I disagreed, but because that wasn't how I framed it. He seemed to understand that. Your father doesn't know, he said. No, I replied, he doesn't. And you're just going to let that continue? I met his gaze. Yes. He studied me carefully. Why? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because it had changed over time. Because this isn't about information, I said finally. It's about perception. He waited. He's already decided who I am, I continued. Anything I say that contradicts that becomes the problem. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, I've seen that. Of course he had. Different context. Same pattern. He's going to push harder, Daniel added, after tonight. I know. He's going to try to control the narrative. I know that too. Another pause. Then quietly. You don't have to handle that alone. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as my sister's fiancé. Not as the man who had saluted me. But as someone who understood the terrain. Why are you helping me? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Because I don't like watching people get misrepresented, he said. And because I've been on the receiving end of that before. That told me enough. He wasn't doing this out of obligation, or curiosity, or even respect. He was doing it because he recognized something. Something familiar. I nodded once. Then we should be careful, I said. A faint smile touched his expression. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before handing it to me. A document. Official. Clean. Recognition report, after action summary. My name was there. My command. My decision. Verified. I shouldn't have this, he said, but I do. I handed the phone back. You don't need to use it, I said. He tilted his head slightly. No, he agreed, but you might. I considered that. Then shook my head. Not like that. His eyes sharpened. How then? I held his gaze. We don't correct him, I said. We let him reveal himself. A slow understanding spread across his face. Publicly, he said. Yes. On his terms. Exactly. He let out a quiet breath. That's risky. I nodded. I know. Silence settled again. But this time it felt different. Aligned. Strategic. Tomorrow night, he said. Engagement dinner, full guest list. People who matter to him. I met his eyes. Yes. He nodded once. Then we'll be ready. He turned toward the door, pausing just before he opened it. For what it's worth, he added, glancing back, you handled that room better than most commanding officers I've worked with. I allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Training, I said. He nodded. Yeah, he replied, I figured. The door closed behind him. I stood alone in the room again. But not the same way as before. Because now, this wasn't just about enduring. It was about positioning. And tomorrow, the narrative would shift. Not because I forced it to, but because I allowed the truth to surface. Exactly where it couldn't be ignored. The house was quieter the next morning. Not empty, never empty, but restrained. The kind of quiet that follows a disturbance people haven't agreed on how to discuss yet. I woke before sunrise. That hadn't changed. Years of service had rewired something fundamental in me. Even in unfamiliar places, even in a bed that didn't belong to me, my body still defaulted to readiness. Stillness first. Awareness second. Movement last. I sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, letting the light filter in through the curtains. Then I stood. The hallway outside my room was dim, the overhead light still off. Downstairs I could hear the faint clink of porcelain, someone in the kitchen. Not a guest. Too early. I moved quietly down the stairs. My father stood at the counter, coffee already poured, a tablet propped up in front of him. He didn't look up when I entered. I was wondering when you'd come down, he said. His tone was neutral. Too neutral. I stepped into the room, stopping a few feet away. Good morning, I replied. He tapped something on the screen, then turned the tablet toward me. An article. Local outlet. Clean layout, professional tone. The headline didn't mention my name. But it didn't need to. Concerns raised over military officers' stability amid family strain. I read the first paragraph, then the second. Each sentence carefully constructed. No direct accusations, just suggestions, anonymous sources. Context shaped just enough to tilt perception. Emotionally volatile. Estranged from family. Fixated on rank and validation. I set the tablet back on the counter. When did this go live, I asked. An hour ago, he said. I nodded once. You move quickly. He lifted his coffee, taking a measured sip. I move efficiently, he corrected. Of course he did. I leaned lightly against the counter, my posture relaxed, my breathing even. This is sloppy, I said. That got his attention. He set the cup down. Sloppy, he repeated. It's rushed, I clarified. The sourcing is thin, the framing is obvious. His eyes narrowed slightly. You think you understand how this works, he asked. I think I've seen enough versions of it, I replied. Silence stretched. Then he smiled. Not warmly. You always did overestimate your perspective, he said. Maybe I allowed, but this won't hold. He stepped closer. It doesn't need to hold, he said quietly. It just needs to introduce doubt. There it was. Not denial. Not defense. Strategy. I studied him for a moment. You're building a narrative, I said. I'm protecting this family, he countered. No, I replied, you're protecting your version of it. His jaw tightened. They're the same thing, he said. They're not. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he turned away, picking up a folder from the counter. Tonight, he said, placing it in front of me is important. I didn't touch it. Emily's future depends on how this evening goes, he continued. Her fiancé's family, their connections, their expectations. I'm aware. Then you understand why we need to be aligned. Aligned. The word settled heavily between us. I'm not interested in alignment, I said. He ignored that. Inside that folder, he continued tapping it lightly, is a simple agreement. I didn't need to open it. I already knew. You'll keep a low profile tonight, he said. No uniform, no discussions about your work, no surprises. I don't plan to cause a scene. That's not enough, he replied. You'll also sign the document. I looked at the folder, then back at him. What document? He smiled slightly. Asset consolidation, he said. Your mother's estate was never properly structured. This simplifies things. By removing my claim. By clarifying it. In your favor. In the family's favor. I let out a slow breath. You've already decided how this ends, I said. Yes, he replied, I have. I picked up the folder then. Opened it. The language was precise, legal, final. Irrevocable transfer, full relinquishment of claim, effective immediately. I closed it. You're asking me to give up everything my mother left me, I said. I'm asking you to do what's right, he corrected. For who? For your sister. Of course. She's starting a new life, he continued. She needs stability, support. And You don't need a house you never use, he said. You don't need assets you don't manage. You have your career. The way he said it. Dismissive. Contained. I'm not signing this, I said. The words were quiet. Final. His expression didn't change immediately. But something behind it did. You haven't even had it reviewed, he said. I don't need to. That's not how responsible people operate. That's not what this is about. His voice sharpened. This is about family. No, I replied. It's about control. The word landed clean. He took a step closer. You're going to make this difficult, he said. I'm going to make this clear. Silence. Then slowly he nodded. Fine, he said. Have your attorney review it. I raised an eyebrow. You're offering that. I'm allowing it, he corrected. There it was again. The language of ownership. Even now. I placed the folder back on the counter. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, I said. His eyes flashed. Just for a moment. You're bringing lawyers into this, he asked. You already did. That's different. No, I said, it's not. He turned away again, pacing once across the kitchen before stopping at the window. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, you're making a mistake, he said. I didn't respond. You always do this, he continued. You push, you resist, you turn everything into a confrontation. I'm setting a boundary. You're creating a problem. I'm refusing to be one. That stopped him. He turned back slowly. You think you're in control here, he said. I met his gaze. I know I am. Silence settled again. But this time, it was different. Because for the first time, he didn't immediately know how to respond. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. So did he. After a moment, he let out a slow breath. This isn't over, he said. I didn't expect it to be. He nodded once. Then picked up his coffee, finishing it in a single controlled motion. Tonight, he added, you'll do exactly what I've asked. I didn't answer. Because we both knew I wouldn't. He left the kitchen without another word. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, replaced by the quiet hum of the house waking up. I stood there for a moment longer. Then reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A message. From Daniel. Daniel, he posted something. Check the link. I opened it. The same article. Already spreading. Shares, comments, reactions. The narrative was taking shape. Fast. I exhaled slowly. Then typed back. Me understood. Another message came through almost immediately. Daniel, we need to talk before tonight. I stared at the screen for a second. Then replied. Me agreed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and glanced once more at the folder on the counter. At the clean lines of the document. At the version of my life my father had already decided for me. Then I turned away. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about timing. And tonight, he would make his move. And when he did, he would do it in front of everyone who mattered to him. Which meant, he would do it exactly where the truth could no longer be contained. We met where no one would think to look. A small coffee shop just outside town, tucked between a dry cleaner and a law office, the kind of place that didn't attract attention, because it wasn't trying to. No polished marble, no curated lighting. Just worn wooden tables, the low hum of conversation, and the steady rhythm of an espresso machine working through the morning. Honest. Unremarkable. Safe. Daniel was already there when I arrived, seated in the far corner with his back to the wall, a clear line of sight to both the entrance and the counter. Of course he was. He looked up as I walked in, gave a brief nod, and slid a second cup of coffee toward the empty chair across from him. "Black," he said. "Figured you didn't complicate things." I sat. "You figured right." For a moment neither of us spoke. Not out of uncertainty, but because silence when used correctly is part of preparation. "Have you seen it?" he asked finally. "I have." And I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle before answering. "It's exactly what I expected," I said. "Fast, controlled, enough truth to make the rest believable." He nodded. "Yeah, that tracks." A pause. "He's not going to stop," Daniel added. "Not after last night." "I know. He's going to escalate." "I know that too." He studied me for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Then let's talk about what happens next." I set the cup down. "Go ahead." He pulled out his phone, unlocking it with a quick motion before turning the screen toward me. A document. Official. Clean. Recognition report. After-action summary. Names, dates, coordinates. Decisions made under pressure. My decisions. "You said you didn't want to use this," he said, "and I get that. I really do." I didn't reach for the phone. "But if he's going to control the narrative," Daniel continued, "then we need to think about how that narrative ends." I met his gaze. "It ends when the truth is undeniable," I said. "And how do you make it undeniable without saying it yourself?" That was the question. The real one. I leaned back slightly, folding my arms, not defensively, just grounding the thought process. "You don't correct him," I said. "You let him commit to the story." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Publicly," he said. "Yes." "Where he can't walk it back?" "Yes." A slow exhale. "That's surgical," he said. "It's controlled." He nodded once. "All right," he said. "Then we need the right environment." "We already have it," I replied. He didn't ask which. He already knew. "Tonight," he said. "The engagement dinner." He leaned back slightly, processing. "Full guest list," he added. "Family, business connections, people who care about reputation." "People who trust him," I said. "And people who will question him," Daniel finished. "Exactly." Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Aligned. Focused. "Then we need structure," he said. "We need timing," I corrected. He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notepad, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. "Walk me through it," he said. I didn't hesitate. "Your father will speak first," he said, anticipating. "Yes," I replied, "he always does." "And he'll frame the evening." "He'll try to," I corrected. Daniel nodded, jotting something down. "And you?" he asked. "I don't interrupt," I said. "I don't react." "You let him build the narrative." "Yes." He looked up. "And then," I held his gaze. "Then someone else introduces reality." A pause. He understood immediately. "Not you," he said. "Number." "Not emotionally." "Number." "Clean," he said. "Clean." He tapped the pen lightly against the page. "Authority," he added. "Yes." "Verification." "Yes." "Timing." "Everything." He let out a slow breath. "This isn't about winning an argument," he said. "No," I replied. "It's about ending one." Silence. Then, "There's someone else," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "Who?" "A contact," he replied. "Senior, high enough that his word doesn't get questioned." "Pentagon." He nodded once. Retired 4-star, still connected, still respected. I considered that. Will he confirm, I asked. He already has, Daniel said, turning the phone back toward me. A video this time. Short. Direct. A man in uniform. 4 stars, no ambiguity. He spoke clearly, precisely. Confirmed my name. My rank. My command. No embellishment. No emotion. Just fact. I watched it once. Then handed the phone back. That's enough, I said. Daniel studied me carefully. You're not surprised. Number. You're not relieved. Number. He frowned slightly. What are you then? I thought about that. Then answered honestly. Ready. That seemed to settle something in him. He nodded once. Good, he said. Another pause. Then, there's one more thing, he added. I waited. He's going to try to isolate you before tonight, Daniel said. Private conversation, maybe more pressure, maybe something legal. I expect it. And if he does, I met his gaze. I don't engage, I said, not emotionally, not defensively. You document, he said. Yes. You hold the line. Yes. A faint smile. Yeah, he said, that tracks too. We sat there for a moment longer, the plan settling into place between us. No theatrics. No improvisation. Just structure. Precision. Execution. Daniel closed the notepad and slipped it back into his jacket. Then we're done preparing, he said. I shook my head slightly. No, I replied, we're done thinking. He raised an eyebrow. And what comes next? I stood reaching for my coffee. Now we execute. He watched me for a second, then stood as well. All right, he said, then I'll see you tonight. I nodded once. Tonight. We walked out of the cafe together, the morning air crisp and steady, the world moving around us, as if nothing significant was about to happen. But I could feel it. The shift. The alignment of variables. The quiet moment before something changes. As we reached the sidewalk, Daniel paused. One more question, he said. I turned. Go ahead. He studied me for a moment. Why now, he asked. You've had years to correct him, years to set this straight. I considered the question. Because it mattered. Because the answer wasn't simple. Then I said, because now, it matters where the truth lands. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, it does. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. Then turned and walked away. Back toward the house. Back toward the version of my life my father had constructed so carefully. Back toward the evening where he would try to reinforce it. In front of everyone who mattered to him. And this time, I wouldn't stop him. Because sometimes, the most effective way to dismantle a story is to let it unfold exactly as intended, until the truth makes it impossible to continue. The ballroom was exactly the kind of place my father preferred. Large enough to impress, controlled enough to manage. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light across polished floors. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space in perfect symmetry, each centerpiece arranged with deliberate care. Conversations flowed easily, laughter measured and appropriate, every movement aligned with expectation. Reputation lived in rooms like this, and tonight, my father intended to reinforce his. I arrived 10 minutes before the program began. Not early enough to draw attention. Not late enough to be noticed. Just present. The dress uniform felt heavier here than it did on base, not because of the weight, but because of what it represented in a room like this. To most of the people around me, it was symbolic at best. To a few, it meant something else. I took a seat near the back. Not hidden. Not central. Positioned. From there, I could see everything. The stage, the podium, the front tables where my father sat, surrounded by people who had built their lives on perception and influence. Emily sat beside Daniel, her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral. She looked like she belonged. She always had. Daniel caught my eye briefly. Just a glance. A confirmation. Nothing more. I gave the smallest nod. Ready? The MC stepped forward, welcoming everyone with practiced warmth. A few light remarks. A joke that landed just enough to relax the room. Then, tonight, he said, we celebrate not just a union but a family. Applause followed. Polite, expected. And to begin, he continued, we invite Mr. Frank Whitman to say a few words. My father stood. Of course he did. He moved to the stage with the same confidence he had carried my entire life, adjusting his cufflinks as he walked, offering a smile that had opened doors for decades. He took the microphone. Thank you, he began, his voice smooth, controlled, familiar. The room leaned toward him. It always did. We gather tonight for something special, he continued. A moment of transition, of growth, of legacy. He paused, letting the words settle. My daughter Emily, he said, gesturing toward her, has always understood what it means to build something meaningful, to choose wisely, to represent this family with grace. Applause. Emily smiled politely. My father let it linger just long enough. Then, not all paths are as clear, he added, his tone shifting just slightly. Not all choices lead where we expect them to. The room grew quieter. Subtly. Carefully. He glanced toward the back. Toward me. Some people, he continued, lose their way. They chase things that sound important but forget what truly matters. There it was. Not direct. Not explicit. But clear enough. A few people shifted in their seats. Others nodded. The narrative was forming. Exactly as planned. I remained still. Hands folded. Breathing even. Let him speak. My father lifted his glass slightly. But tonight, he said, his voice warming again, we focus on what's right, what's stable, what's worth investing in. Applause followed. Stronger this time. More confident. He smiled. Satisfied. Because from where he stood, he believed he had regained control. He finished with a final toast, stepping back from the microphone as the room responded exactly as he expected. Then, Daniel stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just deliberately. He adjusted his jacket, stepped toward the stage, and reached for the microphone before the MC could transition. The shift was immediate. Not loud, but noticeable. Before we continue, Daniel said, his voice steady, there's someone here I need to acknowledge. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't look at my father. He looked toward the back. Toward me. Every instinct in the room followed his gaze. I stood. Not quickly. Not reluctantly. Just steadily. Daniel took a breath. Then, Admiral Whitman, he said clearly. The words landed. Hard. Clean. Final. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything did. Whispers broke across the room like a wave hitting glass. Admiral. Did he say, that's not possible? Daniel didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He simply stepped back and saluted. Precise. Unmistakable. The kind of salute that carries weight not because of how it looks, but because of what it means. The room froze. I returned the salute. Equally precise. Equally controlled. Then lowered my hand. Behind Daniel, the screen flickered to life. No fanfare. No dramatic music. Just information. My name. My rank. My command. Official. Verified. Then, the video. The 4-star general. Clear, direct, unquestionable. Admiral Haley Whitman currently commands. That was enough. The room shifted. Not gradually. Decisively. People stood. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to change the energy. Enough to break the narrative. Applause followed. Slow at first. Then building. Not celebratory. Not emotional. Acknowledging. Recognizing. Correcting. I didn't move. I stood there letting the moment exist without trying to shape it. Because it didn't need shaping. It was already complete. My father stepped forward. Too quickly. Too late. This is absurd, he said, his voice tight. There's been a misunderstanding. No one responded. Not immediately. Because the room had already shifted. Because authority once introduced doesn't get easily dismissed. Daniel didn't look at him. He didn't engage. He simply stepped back from the microphone. His role complete. I met his eyes briefly. A single nod. That was all. I sat down. The applause continued for a few seconds longer, then faded into something quieter, something heavier. The MC hesitated, unsure how to proceed. My father stood near the stage, his expression caught between disbelief and calculation. For the first time, he didn't control the room, and everyone knew it. The program continued eventually, because it had to. Because events like this don't stop, they adjust. But nothing felt the same. Conversations were different now. Quieter. More deliberate. People looked at me differently. Not with curiosity. Not with dismissal. With understanding. And my father, he felt it. Every glance. Every shift. Every moment where his version of reality no longer aligned with what people now knew to be true. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. The point had been made. The narrative had been corrected. And anything beyond that would only dilute it. I stood quietly and made my way toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one tried. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave and let the truth remain, without you needing to stand there and defend it. I didn't remember the drive home. Not in the way people usually remember things. There were no clear turns, no specific streets, no passing landmarks that stood out and anchored the moment in place. Just motion. The quiet hum of the engine. The steady rhythm of headlights cutting through the dark. The kind of silence that doesn't press on you, it carries you. By the time I pulled into the apartment complex, the world had already started adjusting behind me. It always does. Truth doesn't need to chase attention. It simply replaces what was never solid to begin with. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, the faint ticking of cooling metal filling the space around me. No adrenaline. No rush. Just stillness. Mission complete. Area secure. I stepped out of the car, the night air cool against my skin, and walked upstairs without looking at my phone. Not yet. Because I already knew what would be there. Messages. Questions. Reactions. Some supportive. Some curious. Some cautious. That was the pattern. It didn't need to be confirmed immediately. Inside the apartment felt exactly the way I had left it. Quiet, ordered, unpretentious. A space that belonged entirely to me, not shaped by anyone else's expectations. I set my keys on the counter and finally pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. Dozens of notifications. Emails, calls, messages from numbers I recognized and many I didn't. I scrolled past most of them. Stopped at one. Daniel. Daniel, you left before I could say anything. I typed back. Me, you already did. A pause. Then. Daniel, he tried to recover, didn't go well. I allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Me, it wouldn't. Another pause. Then. Daniel, Emily, she's processing. That made sense. Me, she always does. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then returned. Daniel. For what it's worth, I meant what I said. Back there. I looked at the message for a moment longer than necessary. Then replied, Me, I know. I set the phone down. Silence returned. Clean. Uncomplicated. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain anything to anyone. Not my choices. Not my path. Not my absence. Because the truth had already been established clearly, publicly, and without distortion. And more importantly, I hadn't been the one to force it. The knock came the next morning. Sharp. Measured. I opened the door without asking who it was. My father stood there. He looked the same. And completely different. The posture was still straight, the suit still perfectly fitted, the presence still controlled. But something underneath it, something fundamental, had shifted. You're going to invite me in, he asked. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, taking in the space with a quick assessing glance before turning to face me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, You humiliated me, he said. No greeting. No transition. Just the statement. I leaned lightly against the counter, arms relaxed at my sides. I didn't say a word, I replied. His jaw tightened. That's not how it looked? That's not what happened. Silence. He paced once across the room, then stopped, turning back sharply. Do you have any idea what's happened since last night, he asked. Calls, emails, people distancing themselves. I imagine it's inconvenient, I said. His eyes flashed. Inconvenient, he repeated. Everything I've built was built on perception I finished. And now that perception is damaged, he snapped. No, I said evenly. It's corrected. That landed. Hard. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for something leverage perhaps, or weakness, or an opening that no longer existed. You could have handled this differently, he said finally, privately, respectfully. I met his gaze. You didn't. A pause. Then quieter. I was protecting this family. I considered that. Then shook my head slightly. You were protecting control, I said. Another silence. Longer this time. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to signal a shift. Not surrender, but recalibration. What do you want, he asked. The question was simple. Direct. And for the first time, real. I thought about it carefully. Because this moment mattered. Not for him. For me. I want boundaries, I said. He frowned slightly. Boundaries. You don't speak for me, I continued. You don't define me. And you don't reshape my life to fit your narrative. His expression tightened. And if I don't agree, I held his gaze. It doesn't require your agreement. That was the line. Clear. Unmovable. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, what about the house, he asked. Of course. Always back to structure, assets, control. My lawyer will be in touch, I said. You can stay. His eyes narrowed slightly. Stay. At fair market rent, I added. Every dollar goes into a scholarship fund. He blinked. For what? For families of service members who didn't come home, I said. The words settled. Quiet. Final. You'd turn it into that, he asked. I already have, I replied. He shook his head slowly. You're unbelievable. No, I said, I'm consistent. Silence followed. Then, something unexpected. He laughed. Not the same laugh. Not the one that filled rooms. Short. Tired. You always were, he said. For a moment we stood there without speaking. Not reconciled. Not resolved. But clearer. Then he turned toward the door. Paused. You think this changes everything, he said. I considered that. Then answered honestly. No, I said, it just makes everything honest. He nodded once. Then left. The door closed behind him. Soft. Final. I stood there for a moment longer. Then moved to the window looking out over the quiet street below. Life continued. Cars passed. People walked. The world moved forward the way it always does, indifferent to personal conflicts, unaffected by private victories. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. Not immediately. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to. I had spent years trying to be understood, trying to be seen, trying to fit into a version of myself that made other people comfortable. And somewhere along the way, I stopped needing that. Not because I gave up, but because I found something else. Clarity. And clarity doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't wait to be accepted. It simply exists. I exhaled slowly. And for the first time, it felt like enough. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or forced to shrink to fit someone else's expectations, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching from? What part of this resonated with you? We share stories like this every day, stories about strength, truth, and the quiet moments that change everything. If you want more, take a second to subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep going together.